Hello, in today's video, I wanted to talk about how to work and manage eating disorder. Now, psychoanalysis is based on the premises that understanding alone helps the patient change, but it is important to understand that while we will solely keep talking and building understanding, a patient who has eating disorder might also be engaging in a lot of self destructive behavior behind the therapy room. So, it is important that a blend of interpretive as well as behavioral work is done while working with a patient who has eating disorder or who binges or purges or starves in certain periods of time. Now, as we all know, sometimes food can become a way to self soothe, a way to regulate oneself. However, when it is important while working with patients who have ED, to at what specific moments do they go into the binges, what is the food they eat, how much do they eat, and what is the food they do not eat? At what specific moment this ED part emerges? Is it when the dad in the kitchen picks up his phone annoyingly yet again? Or, for example, when a patient was going out with his friends and couldn't decide which flavor of the ice cream should be ordered, ended up ordering both the flavors of double scoop each. So, who is this part of the patient which wanted all? When did it emerge? When the patient was making the decision, how do we deal with this part which wants all of this patient? So it's important that a specific moment, because it's a even though on the surface it feels like the patient has made a decision to binge or to starve, underneath a very complex layer is involved, and it's important that layer is unearthed again and again. We can come to the question of why that night, why then, later, but in that moment, that specific detailed inquiry of that specific moment when that decision has been made to order a double scoop, it's important that moment is investigated. Second, it's important that the patient recognizes which ED represents which part of her life. Is it the abusive boyfriend? Is the ED a drug giver who seduces the patient into eating a lot again and again? For example, for one patient, ED was a little girl child who was really angry that nobody was listening to her, and she would throw tantrums by binging, purging, and sneaking candies into the room. Since this patient was a babysitter, this patient was invited into a conversation. How would she want to treat this little girl child part of hers? What kind of care would she want to give to her? How would she want to listen to her without letting her go on a rampage? If the patient says that ED does not represent anyone or anybody or any part in her life, it seems like a very foreign part. It's a not me part. Then the patient is invited to curiously and silently observe, when does this not me part come up into the picture? Is it when the patient what how is this not me part behaving when the patient is in the bathroom, is in the kitchen, or even in the bedroom? That way shame is kept at bay and curiosity is invited to silently observe this not me part of the patient. Some Third, it is also important that therapist and patient actively work to find substitute for self-soothing for these patients, which substitutes for binging, starving, or purging. So, contracts are made where therapist and patient agree that for this particular period, the patient will only rely on these substitute behaviors instead of binging, purging, or starving. It is also to encourage this developmental capacity for taking care of oneself in the patient, to help them soothe themselves, to help them recognize their own needs. If the patient is cold, then putting on a jacket. That these amount of self care is important and encouraged in these patients. Um, if the contract is broken, eventually it will be, because it is a process, it is a messy process. Then the conversation is invited into the room, that what led to the contract being broken, what happened. This what happened again unfolds into a very detailed inquiry, and to also understand what made the patient agree to the contract in the first place. Is it out of shame? Is it out of the necessity to please the therapist in the room? Or when the contract was being made, the binge part of the patient was silently observing what was being done in the room without being invited into the conversation. So, if even if a number of substitute behaviors cannot be thought of, it's important that at least one behavior is invited into the room, and if at least one behavior which can be replaceable to these binging purging cycle. And if the patient says, I don't know, that's why I'm here, for you to tell me which what to do, what not to do, then it's important that therapist talks about this conversation of, okay, what is stopping the patient from taking their hands in their own life, what is stopping the patient from being actively involved in their own treatment. So the patient and the therapist work side by side as a team to help the patient out of this messy parts of their life. It's a difficult process. It's more of like three-way steps forward, one step back. But it's important that if the therapist sees that the patient is actively harming their body, actively harming themselves, then then all the tasks, all the interpretations, all the other things need to be kept aside, because food occupies a very important place in these patients' life. Everything, anything else is about food. Nothing else matter. Everything else takes a backseat. So it's important that everything else is kept at bay. First, patient's life and basic functioning is restored. Thank you. In case you are struggling with eating disorder, I have few slots open. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll be attaching my contact information below. I also practice offline in Rohini, Delhi, and as well as Gurgaon, which is in Delhi NCR, Haryana. So feel free to reach out to me there. Thank you.